Officer Daniels thought he was untouchable. He had bullied, harassed, and abused his power for years, especially against black people. So when he saw a black woman in court, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed her, pushed her, humiliated her, in front of the judge, in front of witnesses. He made sure she knew who was in charge. But then, she reached into her jacket, pulled out a badge. The courtroom fell silent. Daniels staggered back, his face turning pale. Because this wasn't just any black woman. The truth frees everyone in the court. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the judge prepared to give the final ruling. Officer Daniels stood with his usual smug arrogance, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He had done this dozens of times before, testified against people he had arrested, many of whom had the misfortune of being black, in a city where cops like him thrived on unchecked power. Today was no different, or so he thought. In the back of the courtroom, the doors swung open. A woman in a sleek black suit stepped in, moving with quiet authority. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her presence alone demanded respect. She took a seat in the gallery, her sharp eyes locked onto Daniels as he continued to spew his testimony. Daniels noticed her almost immediately. His gaze flickered with a mix of annoyance and condescension. Another black woman, probably someone's relative hoping for a miracle. He smirked, turning back to the judge. Then she stood up. Daniels stiffened, narrowing his eyes. She wasn't just any courtroom observer. There was something about her, the way she held herself. He didn't like it. "Sit down, lady," he barked, taking a few steps toward her. "This isn't your business." The woman met his glare, unmoved. "Excuse me," Daniels scoffed. He enjoyed these moments, making sure people like her knew their place. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a sneer. "You lost. This ain't the welfare office." A hush fell over the room. The judge's gavel hovered mid-air, shock plastered across his face. A few people gasped audibly. The woman, however, remained completely still. Her dark eyes, piercing and unreadable, never wavered. "Remove your hand," she said, her voice controlled, but with an unmistakable steel edge. Daniels' grip tightened around her arm. "Or what?" He spat, giving her a slight shove. The power trip surged through him. He could already imagine her flustered response. The way she'd shrink away like so many others had. But she didn't. She simply reached into her jacket. Daniels' instincts flared. His muscles tensed as he prepared to react. He knew this move. Someone reaching into their pocket. A sudden motion. He had drawn his gun for less. The entire room held its breath. She pulled out a badge. The air in the courtroom turned to ice. Daniels' smug grin evaporated. His face drained of color, his fingers slipping from her arm as he staggered back a step. The badge gleamed under the overhead lights. But not just any badge. She lifted her chin slightly, her voice calm, but unyielding. "Officer Daniels, I am Chief Renee Carter," she announced, her words slicing through the silence like a blade. "And as of this morning, I am your new boss." The courtroom erupted. Daniels stood frozen in place, his lips parting, but no words came out. The weight of his actions, his arrogance, his unchecked power, came crashing down on him all at once. The judge's gavel finally came down, but it was drowned out by the whispers, the murmurs, the stunned realization that the world as Daniels knew it had just changed forever. A heavy silence hung over the courtroom. Officer Daniels' breath hitched, his mind scrambling to process what had just happened. His world, his unchecked power, had been built on the belief that people like her, black, composed, untouchable, didn't exist. His chief. Renee Carter stood tall, her badge still gleaming in the fluorescent light. Daniels' fingers twitched at his sides, his face contorting as he fought to regain control. The judge tapped his gavel. "Order in the court," he commanded, but even he couldn't mask the intrigue simmering beneath his voice. Renee turned to him. "Your Honor, I request a private discussion regarding Officer Daniels' conduct, both today and in his career. I believe it will be relevant to these proceedings." The judge hesitated, studying her. Daniels could practically feel the shift in the room. The power he wielded was slipping through his fingers. "Very well, Chief Carter," the judge finally said. "We'll recess for 15 minutes. Daniels felt the air leave his lungs. The judge actually listened to her. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Renee turned, locking eyes with him. The intensity in her gaze made him feel smaller than he had in his entire career. Flashback. Renee's journey. Renee Carter hadn't always worn a badge. Born and raised in the very city that had failed so many, she had seen firsthand how the system worked against people who looked like her. Her father, a local pastor, had always preached justice, but he also knew that justice was rare for black families in their neighborhood. At 16, Renee watched as her older brother was pulled over for matching a description. She had stood frozen, clutching their mother's hand as officers dragged him from his car, slammed him against the hood, and threw him in cuffs. He hadn't done anything wrong, but that hadn't mattered. That night had shaped her. She knew then that the only way to fight a corrupt system was to get inside it, to change it. Despite every obstacle, racism in the academy, white officers doubting her authority, superiors questioning her decisions, she had climbed the ranks. And now, she was here. The first black female police chief in the city's history, and her first order of business, cleaning out the rot. Back in the courtroom, Daniels paced the empty aisle, his pulse hammering in his throat. He needed to fix this. He had connections. People who had protected him for years. He grabbed his phone, quickly dialing. "Yeah, it's me," he whispered, when the line picked up. "Why? Have a problem?" Renee stood in a private room with the judge and the defense attorney. "Your Honor," she said, placing a thick folder on the table. "Before we continue Jamal's case, I want you to see something." The judge opened it. Inside were records, complaints, lawsuits, excessive force reports, all with one name attached: Officer Daniels. The judge's face darkened. "Why haven't I seen this before?" "Because Daniels was protected," Renee answered simply. "But not anymore." A knock at the door. An officer stepped in, his face uneasy. "Chief Carter, you might want to see this." Renee followed him into the hallway. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already gathering, and at the center of it all, Daniels, flanked by a lawyer and a few high-ranking officers, was speaking into a microphone. "This is a political hit job," he declared. "I have done nothing wrong. I am being targeted because I uphold the law." Renee clenched her jaw. He was going to fight this, but that was fine, because she was ready. Renee stood at the courthouse entrance, watching the media circus unfold. Officer Daniels was already spinning his narrative, playing the victim, framing himself as a dedicated cop under attack. "This is what happens when you do your job," Daniels said, shaking his head in feigned frustration. "I've spent years protecting this city, putting criminals behind bars, and now, because of political games, my career is being destroyed." Renee's fists clenched at her sides. She had seen it before, how men like him twisted reality to turn themselves into martyrs. But this time, she wouldn't let the truth be buried. Inside the courthouse, the real battle begins. As Renee Ray entered the courtroom, her phone vibrated. A message from Internal Affairs. "Be careful. Daniel still has people protecting him." She sighed, already knowing this wouldn't be an easy fight. But she had prepared for this moment for years. The judge called the session back into order, his gaze flicking between Daniels and Renee. "Chief Carter, I've reviewed the documents you provided," he said. "These are serious allegations." Daniels leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his confidence returning. "Allegations, Your Honor," he said smoothly. "Nothing proven. And let's be honest, the chief here seems to have a personal vendetta against me." Renee stepped forward. "It's not personal, Officer Daniels. It's justice." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that all of Officer Daniels' previous excessive force cases be reopened, starting with the case of Jamal Brown." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Daniels' jaw tightened. The judge nodded. "I will take that into consideration. But I must warn you, Chief Carter,